Having a child working as a restaurant server is a disgrace. That's what my father said to me while I was serving at the party celebrating my brother's promotion. It wasn't just my dad. All the relatives looked at me with the same condescending eyes. Then, something unexpected happened, revealing the truth about who I am. That's when they all started apologizing and trying to make amends. But I said, now, I'd like to share my story with you. Tell me, was I wrong for cutting off all contact with my family? Hello everyone, my name is David. I'm 32 years old and own a chain of upscale 4-star restaurants in New York. Looking at me, most people would probably assume I come from a happy, supportive family. They'd think my family must be proud of what I've accomplished, the success I've built from the ground up. But the truth is far from what people think. My family has never respected what I do. They've seen my work as nothing more than a low-level, unimportant job for years. Not because I haven't been successful, but because my parents and relatives have never cared enough to understand what I do. They assume I'm still just a server, making $4,000 a month, not wearing suits, with no house or car to my name. Every time I visit them, instead of being welcomed with admiration, I'm either ignored or met with cold, judgmental stares. To them, the only person worthy of pride is my older brother, Lincoln. He's 4 years older than me. He works at a big financial firm and makes a high income, and the family celebrates everything he does. And me, even after building a restaurant empire, I'm still seen as the leftover who doesn't quite belong. Even though I'm never invited to essential family events yearly, I still send a few $1,000s back home. I've always tried to maintain the relationship, even if they never truly saw me for who I am. When I was a kid, my parents always tried to treat my brother Lincoln and me equally. We got the same attention. They always told us we were equally important to the family. But then, 6 years ago, a small event changed everything, and things have never been the same since. I was 26 at the time. After 4 years working in finance, I had a stable job earning $120,000 a year. A dream salary for many. I was proud of what I had achieved. My life wasn't luxurious but comfortable, and I felt content. I figured I'd stay with the company, build my career, and enjoy a peaceful life. Then, 2 of my closest college friends, people I'd shared some of the best years of my life with, invited me to start a business with them. They had an idea to open a high-end restaurant in New York, a dream we used to talk about back in college, but now it was becoming a real opportunity. First, I said no. Not because I didn't believe in myself, but because my job felt too secure. I didn't want to give up the safety I had for something as risky as the restaurant industry. But the idea wouldn't leave me alone. I spent night after night thinking about my future, and slowly my mindset shifted. I realized that if I never tried, I'd never know if I could turn that dream into reality. Deep down, I didn't want to keep living in the shadow of my finance job. So, after a lot of thought, I made the decision. I quit my job and jumped into this new chapter with my friends. I worked as a server at a 5-star restaurant in New York to fully understand how a fine dining restaurant operates. I wanted to experience the pressure and challenges firsthand, what staff go through, so I could build my restaurant the right way from the ground up. My family had no idea I had quit my job and started my own business. They still believed I wore a suit daily, working in finance like before. I chose not to tell them about the change because I didn't want them to think I was doing something reckless or crazy. But then, 3 months later, everything changed. My dad called me home after his younger brother, Uncle James, sent him a photo of me working as a server at a restaurant. I remember that day clearly. It was a weekend afternoon. I was bringing menus to a group of guests, and when I looked up at one of them, I froze. It was Uncle James. He stared at me for a moment, clearly caught off guard. I tried to stay calm, kept a professional smile, and continued my service like nothing happened. But deep down, I had a strong gut feeling, like something big was coming. After he left, I kept composure and finished my shift like any other day. But barely an hour later, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was cold, sharp, and firm. Every word clipped and angry. "You get home, right now." That was the moment I knew this wouldn't be just a talk. Something was about to explode. That night, after my dad's call, I went home to my parents' house. When I walked in, it wasn't just my mom and dad. Lincoln and his wife, Elena, were waiting. The air in the room was cold and heavy with tension. My dad didn't say a word. He just threw his phone toward me, his face emotionless. I picked it up, already sensing something was wrong. When I looked at the screen, my heart dropped. It was a message from Uncle James to my dad, and I was shocked by what I read. I thought David was some big success. Turns out he's just a server. And all this time, you've been bragging that he works in finance and makes a great salary. What a joke. Below that message was a clear photo of me in my restaurant uniform. I never expected Uncle James to say something so cruel. I'd always known he was jealous of our family, but he took this moment to humiliate me, and, in his way, take a jab at my parents, too. It hurt, but I kept my emotions in check. I knew I needed to stay calm. As soon as I finished reading, I said, "This is just a misunderstanding, Dad. I'm working in a restaurant. Not because I failed, but because I want to learn the business from the inside out. I'm starting my restaurant." I explained everything, the project I was working on with my friends, the dream we were building. I wanted them to see the bigger picture and understand what I was trying to do. But before I could finish, Lincoln jumped in. "This is insane, David. You had a good job making great money. Why throw that away? You don't need to work in a restaurant to prove anything." Elena didn't hold back either. Right after Lincoln finished, she added, "David, I think you're going way overboard. You don't need to be grinding away in a restaurant like that. It's just a waste of time." My mom, who usually tried to keep the peace, couldn't hold it this time. She said, "Even if you do end up owning a restaurant, you're still just someone serving food to others. There's nothing to be proud of in a job that low." Every word felt like a dagger. My dad didn't say much. He just looked at me coldly and said in a flat, emotionless voice, "If you're not returning to your old job, don't bother coming home again." At that moment, I had nothing left to say. I knew I couldn't go back. But facing rejection from the people I had always tried to make proud of was devastating. That night, I paid the price for following my dream, with silence, judgment, and the sting of being cast out by my family. And I understood from that point on I would have to walk this road alone. After 6 months of working as a server at a 5-star restaurant, combined with my 4 years of experience in finance, I had gained a deep understanding of how top-tier restaurants operate. I didn't just learn about kitchen operations. I learned how to manage a team, build a brand, and create an experience where every guest felt cared for from the moment they walked through the door. The Heritage, that's the name we chose for our restaurant. Heritage wasn't just about elegance. It was a tribute to the culinary values we wanted to celebrate and share. The restaurant was located in Greenwich Village, New York, a vibrant culinary neighborhood perfect for reaching diners who appreciate novelty and sophistication. We started with a total investment of $500,000. I contributed $200,000, and Anthony and Sophia, my 2 closest friends, each paid $150,000. But it wasn't enough to cover everything. We had to take out an additional $500,000 bank loan to pay for the space, interior design, kitchen equipment, and initial marketing efforts. That first year wasn't easy. We leveraged every connection I had from my finance days, inviting former colleagues and clients to try the food and share their experiences. Anthony, who worked in PR, led our media and communication strategy. With her marketing background, Sophia sought out major local events and opportunities that helped us attract attention and build a following. We focused on crafting a high-end menu, a blend of refined, creative dishes, designed to make people feel like they weren't just dining but experiencing something artistic. We hosted special events, wine tastings, jazz nights, and intimate VIP dinners to build loyalty and deepen our relationship with guests. After a year, the Heritage found its rhythm. We had steady revenue and a growing base of loyal customers who returned for the food, outstanding service, and unforgettable ambience. The restaurant didn't just survive. It earned a respected place in New York's culinary scene. By our 3rd year, we had fully paid off our bank loan and recovered every dollar we had invested. That was a proud milestone. But what truly excited me was seeing our restaurant thrive and build a strong and growing base of loyal guests. Still, I wasn't ready to stop there. As the Heritage gained popularity, we started running into new challenges. On weekends, customers were regularly turned away because we were fully booked. During holidays, the demand was overwhelming. And beyond that, we began getting messages from people who lived too far away. Folks who wanted to try our food but couldn't justify the time and cost of travel. It was clear to me we needed to expand. Opening more locations would solve the issue of overcrowding and make it easier for people across the city to experience what we have built. When I brought up the idea of opening additional branches, Anthony and Sophia stared at me like I was crazy. From the very beginning, they were the ones who pulled me into this dream, but now I was the one pushing it further. They were nervous, understandably, but ultimately they trusted me, and we took the next big step together. 6 years later, the Heritage has 4 thriving locations across New York, in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Each branch has been a success, welcomed warmly by its neighborhood and community. We didn't just build a brand, we brought fine dining closer to the people who love and appreciate it, no matter where they live. 6 years have passed, and even with all the success, something still weighs heavy on me, especially during the holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's celebrations. Those are the most challenging times. Since the day I walked away from my family, there's been no contact, no calls, no invites, not even a text asking how I'm doing. We live in the same city, yet every attempt I've made to reconnect has been met with cold silence or avoidance. Like they're embarrassed by me and think being seen with me would somehow bring them shame. They don't say it out loud, but I feel it every time I reach out. Whether I try to invite them out for a meal or check in on how they're doing, all I ever get is silence, or a polite but distant shake. I still remember the holidays when I'd scroll through social media and see photos of them, all together, smiling, laughing, while I sat alone, wondering if they ever thought about me. And yet, I still send nearly $10,000 to my parents every year. Maybe deep down, I still hope they'll see me, that one day, they'll finally acknowledge what I've built. I want them to realize I made it, I succeeded, and not just any success, the kind that should make them proud. Sometimes, I try to convince myself that I'm doing the right thing, building the relationship in my way from a distance. But on those special days, when the world feels warmer and closer, that space where my family should be never disappears. Even though I knew nothing had changed, I kept sending them money every year, because somewhere deep down, I held on to this small hope that they would truly see me one day, not as the outcast son but as someone who built his own life with his own 2 hands. But that hope, all of it changed 3 months ago when something serious happened at one of our restaurants. And from that moment on, I finally realized, I don't need them. In fact, without them, I've done more than survive. I've thrived. It was a weekend, and I was doing one of my usual unannounced visits at our Brooklyn location. I do this often to ensure everything's running smoothly and stay connected with our longtime guests. I've always believed that to maintain a restaurant standard, I need to stay involved, to see things firsthand. While I was in the kitchen, one of the servers rushed in and reported to the manager. One of our staff accidentally spilt wine on a guest, and the guest is furious. The manager immediately moved to handle it, but I stopped him and said calmly, "I'll go with you." When we walked into the VIP section, I froze. Sitting there, my parents, my brother's family, and a few relatives. They looked at me in complete shock, like they couldn't believe what they saw. I'll never forget the look in their eyes. Confusion, discomfort, maybe even a slight panic. It was the first time in years that I'd seen them like this. Not on the street, not in passing, but face to face in my restaurant. And I knew, at that moment, there was no avoiding what came next. As soon as I walked in, the server started to speak. "This is the manager," and I quickly raised my hand to stop him. I didn't want him accidentally revealing who I was. Not in this moment, not like this. Then, without missing a beat, my brother Lincoln spoke up, his voice thick with sarcasm. "So this is what became of that big project 6 years ago? Turns out you're just a restaurant manager after all." His words hit me like a slap across the face. Even though I had mentally prepared for a moment like this, hearing it from my brother stung deeply. I didn't respond, but I could feel the anger rising in my chest. Just then, Ryan, the branch manager in Brooklyn, stepped forward and began to say, "Sir, this is actually..." I cut him off immediately, my voice cool and steady. "It's been a while. How's everyone doing?" No one answered, just silence. I wasn't surprised. That was always how they were. Even with me standing right there in front of them, they still couldn't look me in the eye or acknowledge how much my life had changed. About a minute later, my father finally spoke. His voice was cold, laced with disgust. "If I had known you were working here as a server, I wouldn't have come. It's embarrassing." My mother jumped in right after, her tone filled with disappointment. "It's shameful to have a child working as a waiter." I opened my mouth to speak, trying to stay calm. "Dad, Mom." But before I could finish, they both raised their hands to stop me, their eyes hard, like they were cutting off all connection. "Don't call us that. We haven't had a son like you for a long time. Having a child working in a restaurant is a disgrace." The tension in the room turned suffocating. Couldn't hold it back anymore. My anger boiled over, and I looked them straight, no longer filtering anything. "If you don't consider me your son, Why keep accepting the $10,000 I send yearly? Isn't that money just as disgraceful? My words hit like a slap, and the room fell silent for a long moment. Then my father let out a cold laugh and replied, eyes like ice. You sent it on your own. We didn't ask for it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That answer only added fuel to the fire inside me. I took a breath, trying to hold on to what little composure I had left, and asked, then tell me, what does success look like to you? What's considered a source of pride for this family? Without hesitation, my father turned his gaze to Lincoln, my older brother, the one they'd always held up as the golden standard. Lincoln sat back in his chair, arms crossed, looking at me with that same smug look I'd seen 1,000 times. And then my father answered, look at your brother. That's what success looks like. He's got a smart wife, a director, always dressed sharp in a suit. Not in some cheap server uniform like you. And in that moment, it hit me. No matter what I did or what I built, they would always measure me against Lincoln. Every word out of their mouths wasn't just to praise him. It was meant to diminish me, to remind me I'd never be good enough in their eyes. About a minute later, my father finally spoke, his tone cold and filled with contempt. If I had known you worked here as a server, I wouldn't have come. What a disgrace. My mother followed quickly, her voice heavy with disappointment. It's embarrassing to have a son working as a waiter. I opened my mouth, trying to speak calmly. Dad, Mom. But they both cut me off with a stern wave of the hand, their eyes sharp and unforgiving, like they were severing all ties. Don't call us that. We haven't had a son like you for a long time. Having a child working in a restaurant is a disgrace. The air turned so thick you could cut it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger that had been simmering for years finally spilt out. I looked them dead in the eye and asked, without restraint, if I'm not your son, why take the $10,000 I send yearly? Isn't it humiliating to accept that kind of money? My question hung in the air like a slap. The silence that followed felt endless until my father gave a dry, bitter laugh and said coldly, you sent it on your own. We never asked for it. I could barely believe it. That response, dismissive, heartless, only fueled my frustration. I took a deep breath and asked, then tell me, what is a source of pride for this family? My father didn't hesitate. He turned to look at Lincoln, my older brother, their forever shining example. Lincoln sat there, smug, leaning back in his chair, eyes filled with quiet arrogance. And then my father said, look at your brother. That's success. He's got a smart wife, a director, always dressed in a sharp suit. Not some cheap server uniform like you. Right then and there I finally saw it. They had always used Lincoln as the measuring stick. And every word they spoke wasn't just admiration for him. It was a deliberate effort to make sure I knew exactly where I stood, beneath him. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, a deep, composed voice echoed from behind us, apologies for being late. Every head in the VIP section turned toward the man who had just arrived, a middle-aged gentleman in a tailored gray suit, walking confidently, which seemed to shift the atmosphere with each step. Immediately, I saw Lincoln straighten up, flick his hair back, jump to his feet, adjust his blazer, and stride over with a polished smile. Boss, we've been waiting for you. The man gave him a polite nod and extended his hand. A formal, distant handshake, followed by a faint smile. But moments later, his eyes left Lincoln and landed squarely on me. His expression shifted, warmer, more sincere, as he walked straight toward me and extended his hand. Well, if it isn't the owner of the heritage. It's been a while, David. The entire table fell into stunned silence. I didn't leave him waiting. I didn't pretend to be surprised or flustered. I smiled, extended my hand firmly, and replied, hello, Mr. Thomas. It's good to see you. How have you been? The man who had just walked in was Thomas Graham, CEO of Graham and Weiss Financial Group, where Lincoln had worked for nearly a decade. The same man my brother referred to as the big boss every chance he got. But Mr. Graham wasn't just a titan in the New York financial world. He was also a longtime VIP guest at the Heritage, one of our most loyal patrons. After our greeting, Mr. Graham glanced around the room, sensing the heavy air. With a slight frown, he turned to me. I get the feeling I walked into something tense. Is everything all right? I kept my tone calm and professional. Just a small incident, sir. One of our servers accidentally spilt wine on a guest. We've already apologized and offered a solution. Right on cue, Elena, who had been loud, condescending, and demanding compensation just minutes earlier, suddenly changed her tone. She forced a bright smile and nodded eagerly. Oh no, it's nothing serious, just a small accident. I've already agreed to let it go. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was doing, trying to save face now that she realized who was sitting across from her. But I didn't call her out. I didn't have to, because in that moment, everyone in the room saw things for what they truly were. And finally, they all understood who held their place and who didn't. After that unexpected introduction, I slipped back into my office, leaving the party to continue without me. I figured that was the end. A minor incident, a brief unmasking, and nothing more. But I was naive. A while after the dinner had ended, as I was reviewing reports in the back office, one of the staff came rushing in and knocked on the door. David, they're asking for you outside. Said they need to speak with you. I sighed. The energy shift was instantly noticeable when I stepped out and walked back toward the front register. The same faces that were cold and cutting not long ago were now smiling, forced, overly sweet, painfully fake. Elena was the first to speak, her voice suddenly soft and pleasant. David, about the dress incident earlier. Really, I wasn't upset at all. It was just an accident. Everyone makes mistakes, right? A relative chimed in with a laugh. We were just saying how proud we are of you. You've done an amazing job. The restaurant's truly top class. Your parents must be so proud. Before I could say anything, my father jumped in. His tone disguised as a suggestion but a command. About tonight's meal, you should comp it for the family. We're all kin, after all. And then, as if rehearsed, Lincoln stepped forward, puffed up like some seasoned executive. Also, you should give me a VIP card, the top tier. After tonight, I can bring in many new clients for you. It'll be good for business. If you're serious about sustainability, maybe it's time to cut me in on the profits. Call it a family partnership. I stood silently behind the register, scanning their faces, each one straining to hold up a false smile. Then I laughed. A loud, full laugh filled the room. Not mocking, not bitter, just free. When the laughter faded, I looked at each of them and spoke slowly, clearly. Are you people out of your minds? After everything you said, everything you did, now you want a free meal? A VIP card? A share of my business? I paused, then continued, my tone colder now. No, not. I don't owe any of you a damn thing. And if any of you keep standing here making demands? I nodded toward the computer at the register, where the live security footage was displayed. I'll send the footage from earlier, when you were all insulting me, straight to Mr. Thomas's inbox. Let's see if he still wants to keep a director like you, Lincoln. Lincoln's face went pale. Elena clutched her purse a little tighter, eyes darting away. My parents said nothing. They knew. They knew they just stepped right into the mess they made for themselves. No one said another word. They paid, in full, not a single cent discounted, and walked out of the restaurant one by one, not a single person daring to look back. I stood behind the counter watching them go. No joy, no sadness, just a quiet, weightless sense of peace, like I had finally set down something I'd been carrying for far too long. After that unexpected encounter, one thing became clearer to me than ever before. To them, I was only worthy of acknowledgement when I had status, money, and a name they could brag about. I wondered if that day I had just been a server, standing there apologizing in front of them instead of the restaurant owner, would their attitude have changed? But I already knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have. To them, respect was measured by title and position. Character, effort, kindness, those things never made it into the conversation. And after everything, I finally understood. Family, real family, should love you unconditionally. It should be where you're a CEO or a server, rich or struggling, you're still respected. You still have a place to come home to. I didn't have that, but I've learned to accept it. More importantly, I've learned how to build a family rooted in respect, empathy, and genuine connection. And if someone out there hears this and has ever felt hurt by those who were supposed to love you most, if you've ever been compared, belittled, or made to feel like you weren't good enough, then let me offer this from the heart. Live by your values. Don't chase someone else's approval at the cost of your peace. Because in the end, real love, the kind that matters, never requires you to prove yourself to earn it. And my story didn't end there. A month after that encounter, my father called. I saw his name flash on my screen and didn't answer. A few minutes later, my mother called. I stayed silent. No response. Then came the message. Next week is Mom's birthday. Come home, okay? Everyone's hoping you'll be there. I sat there, staring at the screen, reading that sentence repeatedly. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel happy. I just had one question echoing in my mind. Do they want me back? Or do they remember I have money now? Status? Influence? I didn't reply, and I didn't go. But I did send a gift. A luxury jewelry set worth $2,000. Was delivered right to my mother's doorstep on the morning of her birthday, along with a straightforward message. I stopped being your son 6 years ago. This is my last gift. I hope you'll cherish it. No anger, no resentment, just a final goodbye as soft as a sigh. After that, I blocked every form of contact, phone, text, social media. No more waiting, no more hoping. I had given them so much, but in the end, what I needed most never came. And sometimes, letting go is the only way left to protect the last piece of dignity a child can hold on to it. It's been 3 months since that day. I thought that would be the end, we'd all go our separate ways. But no, they kept coming. Every few weeks, my parents, Lincoln, Elena, and extended relatives started showing up at the Brooklyn branch. They asked the staff if I was around. But I had already given instructions, whenever they come, say I'm not here. I'm not hiding. I just don't want to face them anymore. Some relatives must have heard the whole story from my parents, because now, I get messages calling me cold and ungrateful. But there were others, friends who had seen everything from the beginning. They told me I did the right thing, that I finally stood up for myself. I set clear boundaries with people who had only ever taken and never given back. I hear both sides, but truthfully, I don't care about anyone's judgment anymore, because now, I live for me. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever sit at the same table with them again. I don't know if I'll ever forgive them or even if I want to. That's up to fate. As for now, there's only one thing I know for sure. I'm tired. And sometimes you don't need to explain that kind of tiredness. You need to stop looking back. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, the one still here, still listening to me in this final moment. If you were me, what would you do? Would you forgive? Would you go back? Or would you choose to walk away in silence? Like I did? Leave your thoughts below the story. I genuinely want to hear them. And if something in this story resonated with you, if it stirred even the smallest part of your heart, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share this with someone who might need to hear it, too. Thank you truly for being here. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in the following story. Your wife's death is the reason you got fired. You heard that right. Those words came from the man who gave me life, the one I spent my whole youth calling Dad. I devoted nearly a decade of my prime years to building his company, our family's company, from a no-name operation into a serious force in the transportation industry. I poured my heart, trust, and entire life into it. And now, after losing my wife at the lowest point in my life, they didn't just turn their backs on me. They used the deepest pain I've ever known as an excuse to cover their failures and weaknesses. And it was at that moment I finally understood. Family isn't always a safe harbor. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away. Follow along with this story, and let me know what you think about my choices along the way. Hello, my name is Gavin Whitmore. I'm 32 years old and currently the Chief Operating Officer at Carter Dynamics, a company specializing in supply chain management and transportation logistics. Like Carter Dynamics, my family once owned a business in the same industry. I used to believe I'd spend my entire life working in the family business, that it would be the place where I'd build my future. But life doesn't always follow the plans we make. And sometimes the most brutal blows come from the people we trust. Even though a year has passed, the pain of losing my wife still lingers inside me, like a wound that never truly heals. But what's been even harder to move past is the betrayal from my own family. In the darkest days of my life, when I needed a hand to hold, they chose to turn their backs on me. Not just turn away, but to shove me out of their lives in the cruelest way possible. If there's anything that haunts me more than the day I lost the woman I loved, it's the way my family used that moment of weakness to stab me in the back without a second thought. And that was when I realized I had no choice but to learn how to walk alone. It all started over a year ago. After 4 months of battling late-stage ovarian cancer, my wife, Ella, took her last breath, still holding tightly onto my hand. We had met 3 years earlier at an industry conference in San Diego. Ella was an event coordinator then, and I had just started managing a minor division within my family's company. We met, we laughed, and it didn't take long to realize we had found something special in each other. After 2 years of dating, we decided to get married. We thought life would unfold peacefully, just like it does for so many other couples. Falling in love, getting married, and welcoming happy little kids into a home filled with laughter. But life is never that simple. We found out about Ella's illness on a morning in March. She suddenly collapsed in the kitchen while she was making breakfast. When I rushed her to the hospital, I thought maybe she had just been overworking herself. But then the doctor came out, his face heavy with sorrow, and gave us the diagnosis. Late-stage ovarian cancer. It was a cold, clinical sentence wrapped in a brutal truth. She had about 4 months left. Hearing those words, I felt like my entire world shattered. It was as if the ground had collapsed beneath my feet. All our plans, all our dreams, reduced to ashes. After hearing the doctor's words, I tried to hide the truth. I told myself I had to stay strong, to keep smiling as if nothing had changed. But somehow Ella knew. She just had to look into my eyes and understand everything without an explanation. In the following days, I spent nearly every free moment by her side. I cut back on work, turned down meetings, and pushed aside anything unnecessary. We took more walks, cooked more meals together, and stayed up talking longer into the night, as if we were trying to hold on to every precious moment slipping quietly through our fingers. Sometimes, I wished it was all just a bad dream, a nightmare I would eventually wake up from and find Ella back in the kitchen, laughing and pulling one of her silly little pranks on me. I tried everything, from adjusting her treatment plans to getting her into the best medical centers I could find, holding on to a hope that, somehow, a miracle would happen. But just like the doctors had said, for months later, she was gone. It was a quiet afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, draping across her face like a soft, gentle blanket. Ella held my hand tightly and whispered through broken breaths, "Promise me, you'll live well, and someday, you'll find happiness again." Even though my heart was screaming to hold on to her, I nodded and forced a smile, because I knew it was the only way to let her go in peace. 3 days later, we held Ella's funeral. That day, almost everyone who knew me and Ella showed up. Her parents, close friends, old colleagues, and neighbors. They all put their lives on hold and traveled long distances to say their final goodbyes. Only my family was missing. My father, Anthony Whitmore, and my brother, Jordan Whitmore, never showed up. My mother, Lillian Whitmore, came by for about 10 minutes. She stood by the casket, laid down a wreath, and then quietly searched for me in the crowd. When I asked her, "Where are Dad and Jordan?" she just shook her head and whispered so softly I had to lean in to hear, "The company's busy, they couldn't make it." I stood there, clenching my hands to hold back my anger. That excuse, if it could even be called an excuse, felt worse than silence. Because deep down, I knew they hadn't visited once through all 4 months of Ella's fight. Not even a message, not a word of support in her final days. That was the first time in my life I truly understood. Sharing the same blood doesn't mean they'll stand by you when you need them most. For days after Ella's funeral, I returned to work. As I walked into the office, my team members immediately paused what they were doing. One by one, they approached me, offering a nod, a firm handshake, or a light pat on the shoulder. No fancy words, no awkward small talk, just honest gestures of sympathy that said more than words could. The internal phone rang around 10 o'clock that morning as I was buried in a mountain of backlogged emails, forcing myself to focus on escaping the weight of reality. My father's voice came through, cold and emotionless. "Come up to my office." Without a word, I set down my pen and stood up. When I stepped into the conference room, my father was already sitting at the head of the table. Jordan was slouched lazily in the chair next to him. No one offered me a seat. No one even looked at me with an ounce of sympathy. Before I could say a word, my father spoke. "You're fired. Your shares will be reclaimed." I froze. He hadn't called me up to share in my grief or to offer support. He called me up to fire me. Took me a few seconds to find my voice. When I finally spoke, my throat was tight. "Why?" Without missing a beat, he replied, his voice as flat and cold as a verdict. "Because you took a week off. The company lost a $200,000 contract." Hearing that, I felt my whole body numb but somehow stayed calm. I answered slowly, each word measured. "You approved my leave. You said Jordan would cover things while I was gone. Right on cue, as if waiting for the moment to twist the knife, Jordan cut in, his voice dripping with arrogance. Don't try to blame me, Gavin. Everybody's gotta own up to their own mistakes. Before I could even react, my father turned to Jordan, then locked eyes with me, his voice sharp enough to cut. Exactly. Don't blame Jordan. If you want to blame someone, blame your wife. I stood there, my heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. Couldn't believe it. After everything I had given them, everything I had sacrificed, they swept it all away without a second thought. But it didn't stop there. My father kept going, each word cutting deeper than the last. Your wife's death cost the company that contract. Your wife's death is the reason you got fired. If your wife hadn't died, you wouldn't have taken time off, and the company would have made a huge profit. The air in the room was so heavy it felt like it could crush any sound before it formed. I stared straight at him, the man who had once been the very symbol of everything I trusted in my youth, and realized I had never truly known him. It wasn't Ella's death that broke me. It wasn't the grief that made me want to collapse and sob. It was this moment, this brutal realization, that in my family's eyes, my pain was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and their money. The anger inside me boiled over. I ground out each word, my voice shaking with the force it took to hold myself together. What the hell are you saying? I stepped forward, planting my hands firmly on the cold surface of the table, locking eyes with him. My wife died, and you didn't say a damn word. Not once did you check on her. Not once did you visit. And now, you stand here dragging her name through the dirt to cover up your failures. Yours and Jordan's? Before the last word left my mouth, my father slammed his hand down on the table. The sharp and violent sound echoed through the closed room, making Jordan flinch. He roared, his voice raw and furious. Enough! Get the hell out! Without a second's hesitation, I reached up and tore off my employee badge. The same badge I had once worn so proudly, the one he had personally handed me on my first day as an executive. I ripped it off and threw it onto the table before him, where it landed with a cold, final thud. Without looking back, I walked out of that room, out of the place I had once thought would always be part of my life. And in that moment, I knew I had lost this family forever. After leaving my father's office, I quietly returned to my own. My steps felt heavy, but I didn't let myself hesitate. I opened my locker and started packing up my things. One notebook, one pen, one small framed photo of Ella and me from launching a new project. Each item carefully placed into a plain cardboard box. When a few of my team members noticed me packing, they lifted their heads, their faces a mix of surprise and concern. One of them spoke up, his voice hesitant. Boss Gavin? What's going on? I just gave a small smile and shook my head. I knew there was no point in trying to explain. Suddenly, from across the room, Lincoln, an employee who had worked closely with me for 2 years, called out, his voice full of anger. There's a termination email about Gavin. They're saying he lost a big contract because he took a week off. The room fell into a stunned silence. Then another voice broke through, filled with outrage. But his wife just passed away. That's ridiculous. Whispers quickly spread throughout the room, and I watched as expressions shifted from shock to growing anger. A few minutes later, Lincoln stepped forward, his voice steady and loud. If Gavin's leaving, I'm leaving too. I know exactly what Jordan's capable of. He's nothing but a useless hack. Before anyone could even react, Nolan, the project team leader, added firmly, I'm out too. And right after that, Brian, the head of strategic partnerships, calmly set his pen down and said, clear as day, count me in. Each sentence felt like another crack shattering the fake image this company tried so hard to maintain. Standing there, I could only freeze for a moment. My heart ached, not because I had just lost a career I had poured my soul into, but because of these people. People I had mentored, fought alongside, who still chose to stand with me, even when I had no power left to offer them. I swallowed hard, gripping the box in my hands, and I honestly didn't know what to say for the first time that day. And now all I was left with was one cruel sentence: your wife's death is the reason you got fired. I could have forgiven them if the pain they caused had only been directed at me. I had once stubbornly told myself to look the other way, to believe that blood ties could never be truly broken. But if they dared to insult Ella, the woman I loved most, the woman who left this world in pain and loneliness, then, even though she was no longer here, I would never allow them to tarnish her memory again. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. I would show them. The betrayal, the coldness, and the cruelty they sowed would all return to them. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't seek revenge with reckless fury. I would repay everything they owed me, with success, strength, and absolute, unshakable resolve. And when that day came, I would stand before them, with not a drop of pity left in my eyes. Not because I had become heartless, but because they chose this ending, the moment they used my wife's death as an excuse for their failures. The next day, after a long night of thinking, I took a whole week off to travel. I needed time to myself. A stretch of quiet to start healing from the loss of Ella and to soothe the fresh wounds left by my own family. For that entire week, I completely disconnected. No emails, no calls, no texts, just me, a few unfamiliar cities, and endless roads where my sadness could dissolve into the wind. The week passed in the blink of an eye. As I stepped back into my old house that afternoon, a wave of familiar, hollow emptiness washed over me. I tossed my suitcase into the corner, sank into the sofa, and reached for my phone. The moment I turned it on, the screen lit up, flooded with missed calls, unread messages, and email notifications. The blinking blue light felt almost mocking, as if the world had spun forward while I was frozen. I scrolled through the emails. Most were junk ads or belated messages from old colleagues. But then my fingers stopped at a name I knew all too well: Matthew Carter. Matthew, a former friend and, for years, the fiercest rival to my family's company. Without hesitation, I opened the email. Inside was just a single line: "Call me as soon as you see this." No explanations, no small talk. Without a second thought, I dialed his number. The phone rang only twice before he picked up. Matthew's voice came through, urgent but measured. "Gavin, are you free tonight? I want to take you to dinner. There's something important we need to discuss." I froze for a moment, then answered without hesitation. "Sure, just send me the address." After hanging up, I sat there for a long minute, feeling a strange sense of anticipation stirring inside me. A sense that something was about to change. And this time I knew I had to be ready for it. That night, at 7 o'clock, I arrived at the restaurant Matthew had sent me the address for. Matthew had gotten there 10 minutes earlier. When he saw me walk in, he stood up and shook my hand, his eyes flashing a rare sincerity. We didn't jump straight into business. After a few brief words of encouragement, we shared dinner, chatting about harmless, trivial topics. When dessert was finally brought out, I set my knife and fork down, looked up at him, and got straight to the point. "So, what's this dinner really about?" Matthew leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "I heard you got fired." At his words, I just gave a slight smirk, my voice tinged with sarcasm. "News travels fast." "Huh?" Not letting the silence stretch, Matthew continued, his tone slow and deliberate, as if choosing his words carefully. "Because you're talented, Gavin. I'm willing to bet you've gotten no less than 10 offers from rival companies this past week." I just smiled, neither confirming nor denying. But from the look in Matthew's eyes, he already knew. A few seconds later, as if he had rehearsed it, Matthew leaned forward, his voice dropping low but firm. "Come work for me. I'll make you Chief Operating Officer. And here's the deal: you can bring your team with you. I'm not joking, Gavin. If you don't come with me, I'll ensure no other competitor touches you." As soon as he finished, Matthew burst out laughing. A sharp, confident laugh that echoed through the corner of the restaurant. But even behind the laughter, I could tell he was dead serious. I sat there momentarily, sipping my water, letting the offer roll through my mind. Sensing my hesitation, Matthew quickly added, his voice softening, "You don't have to decide tonight. Think it over. Give me your answer in 3 days." Right then, I set my glass down, locked eyes with him, and said without a hint of doubt, "No need for 3 days. Draw up the contract. I'll be at your office first thing in the morning. As long as you keep your word, my team comes with me." For a brief second, Matthew's eyes lit up like he had just scored a significant victory. 20 minutes later, we walked out of the restaurant together. Standing under the quiet night sky, I took a deep breath, feeling a real spark of hope for the first time in weeks. This time I knew I was starting over, but not for family, for myself. The next morning, I arrived at Carter Dynamics right at 8 o'clock. The brand new office building stood out in the heart of downtown. Not flashy, but polished, professional, and impressive in every detail. As soon as I entered the lobby, I saw Matthew waiting for me. He walked over and gave me a firm handshake, his eyes shining with genuine trust. "Welcome home, Gavin." After that, we headed straight for the elevators. On the way up, Matthew didn't say much. Maybe he understood that I didn't need empty words right now. I needed action. When we reached the executive floor, he led me into a small, private conference room already prepared for us. A thick contract sat waiting on the table, a sleek fountain pen placed neatly beside it. Matthew gave a small smile, his voice steady and sure. "I kept my word. You'll be our chief operating officer. Salary, benefits, and the clause allowing you to bring your team are all in there." Without hesitation, I picked up the pen and started skimming the terms. Every line on that paper felt like confirmation that I wasn't a pawn in someone else's game this time. Took me less than 10 minutes to sign everything. When I placed the pen down for the final time, Matthew reached out and gripped my shoulder firmly. "I know you're not going to let me down." He stepped out of the room, leaving me alone with the freshly signed documents. I sat there for another minute, drawing in a deep breath. At that moment, a strange feeling washed over me. Not quite excitement, not quite relief, just a quiet, unshakable determination. The news that Gavin Whitmore had joined Carter Dynamics spread like wildfire throughout the logistics and transportation industry. By that very morning, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Message after message, call after call, email after email, all from former colleagues, people who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with me at the family company. As I scrolled through my inbox, familiar names popped up. The chief engineer, the head of operations, the warehouse supervisor, and every message carried the same simple line. "If there's a spot for me, I want to come with you." Without a second's hesitation, I started making a list. In my heart, there was no room left for two-faced people. No space for those who only knew how to follow the changing winds. I chose only those who had stood by me and believed in me when I had nothing left. Those who chose loyalty over easy opportunities. That very afternoon, Matthew and I held an emergency meeting. He chuckled in pure satisfaction when I handed him the list. "You've pulled together all the heavy hitters from back in the day. You're bringing a championship team over here, Gavin." I answered with just a short smile. "No need for big words. There is no need for boasting." We both knew this team would become the foundation for something huge. The next day, the internal interviews were quick and straightforward. No screening rounds, no complicated tests. Just one simple question I asked each one of them. "Do you still trust me enough to fight by my side again?" And not a single one hesitated. Every handshake was firm. Every glance was filled with certainty. We, those who had once been cast aside, doubted and underestimated, would rebuild everything from the ruins that others had left behind. The days that followed passed so quickly I could barely feel the time slipping by. With news of my move to Carter Dynamics spreading, and the reputation I had built over the years, I barely had to lift a finger to attract business. Everything shifted when clients heard I was no longer with the family company. It became clearer that the relationships I had spent years cultivating weren't just because of the Whitmore name. They were because of me. No cold calls, no sales emails. One by one, major clients, the same partners who had trusted me through countless projects, began pulling away from my old company. Contracts were canceled. Partnership proposals were withdrawn. Meetings postponed indefinitely. All of it happened within less than a month after I left. I didn't feel smug. I didn't celebrate it. But I didn't feel sorry either. When my family chose betrayal, they severed the ties that had once held the most outstanding value I had ever brought them. Now they were reaping what they had sown. And just as I had predicted, my phone rang 2 months later on a late evening as I was tidying up my paperwork to head home. When I glanced at the screen, the name that appeared made me pause for a second. Anthony Whitmore. I let a small, cold smile cross my face. I knew this call would come sooner or later. Without rushing, I answered, keeping my voice steady. "What do you want, Dad?" I spoke first. Immediately, his voice came through, a little strained. "Gavin, we need to talk." I stayed silent and calm, waiting for him to reach the point. A few seconds later, as if reading from a script, Anthony spoke, his tone carefully measured. "Would you consider coming back? The company's struggling. We need you." I said nothing. I just waited, letting him fill the silence. His voice dropped, a rare trace of urgency leaking through. "I'm willing to offer you 30% more than what Carter Dynamics is paying you, and your shares, they'll be reinstated." At that moment, I closed my eyes briefly, letting the emptiness spread quietly from within. Promises, belated offers, all of it isn't very sensible now. I lifted my gaze toward the city lights shimmering outside the window, then said slowly, "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Immediately after my question, the line went silent. No excuses, no sighs, just heavy, undeniable silence. A silence that spoke louder than any words could. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. Everything between us had ended a long time ago. Today was just the day we finally said it out loud. After last night's call, I thought they would get the message and leave me alone. But I was wrong. The next morning, at 7, the doorbell started ringing, loud and relentless. I was still in the kitchen making coffee when it began, the sound dragging on until I had to set my mug down and walk quickly to the door. When I opened it, standing there was my mother. She looked worn down and broken, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as if desperately clinging to any last shred of hope. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward, her voice shaking and choked with sobs. "Gavin, please come back. The family needs you. I'm begging you." I tightened my grip on the doorframe, keeping my voice calm. No anger was left inside me, only a cold, heavy stillness. Right then, a warning from a former colleague flashed through my mind. Someone who had secretly messaged me. "Be careful. They only want you back to save the company. Once it's stable, they'll throw you out again just like before." I didn't need any more proof. I took a deep breath, lifted my head, and looked directly at my mother. The woman who had once held me in her arms, now standing before me like a desperate negotiator in a one-sided deal. My voice dropped, colder than it had ever been. "That's enough, Mom." She looked up at me, startled, tears streaming down her face. I stepped fully out onto the porch, my voice firm and unshaken. "I know everything. I know about the company collapsing. If I return when things are fixed, you'll push me out again, just like last time." She opened her mouth to deny it, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "Save it. Last time, I lost everything because I believed in family. It's not happening again." Right then, I pulled out my phone, holding it up between us, and said steadily, "I've already filed for a restraining order. Starting today, you, Dad, and Jordan are not allowed within a single step of me. If you keep harassing me, the police will get involved." She froze, her face draining of color, her mouth moving silently as if to plead, but I had already turned back inside. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed heavily through the house, a final, resounding end. I leaned against it, closing my eyes for a few seconds. No more pain, no more anger, only freedom. Without me, the family company spiraled out of control. Within just a few months, major contracts were canceled. Old partners turned their backs. Key personnel walked out the door. And Jordan and Anthony sank deeper into the wreckage they had created for themselves. I didn't care. I didn't track their downfall step by step. But the news still found its way to me, through friends, business partners, and cold, detached business articles. One evening, while I was sitting on the balcony, nursing a glass of whiskey over melting ice, my phone suddenly rang. I wasn't surprised when I saw the name flash across the screen. Jordan Whitmore. I hesitated for less than a second before picking up. The moment the call connected, Jordan's voice exploded through the speaker, filled with rage. "This is all your fault." The words hit my ear like a slap, but I stayed still, my gaze calm and steady as a still lake. After a single breath, I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and replied, my voice as cold as steel. "I built it up, and I can tear it down." On the other end of the line, Jordan froze, speechless. I hung up without hesitation, not giving him the chance to say anything else. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the starry night sky. No sense of triumph, no feeling of victory, just the inevitable end, the price they had to pay for their greed and betrayal. 2 weeks ago, on a late afternoon, the doorbell suddenly rang as I was revising some new operational plans. I frowned immediately. I wasn't expecting anyone that day. Walking to the door and opening it, the sight that greeted me made me want to slam it shut right then and there. Anthony and Jordan. They stood there, pale and disheveled, far from the proud, self-assured men they used to be. Their eyes avoided mine, but their clenched fists betrayed their desperation, as if clinging to the last scraps of dignity they had left. Slowly, I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning casually against the doorframe, my voice cold as ice. "What do you want?" Anthony immediately cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously as he searched for the right words. "Gavin, your brother and I, we need your help." I didn't answer, I just raised an eyebrow, waiting. Jordan awkwardly stepped half a pace forward, his voice rough and shaky. We know this house. You repurchased it when you were working for the family company. Technically, it was with the help of the family. Dad and I hoped you could sell it and use the money to save the company. Hearing that, I let out a short, sharp laugh that instantly froze the air between us. Before they could offer any more pitiful excuses, I spoke, my voice low and cutting, every word like a blade. If you don't want to deal with the police, I suggest you get off my property within 30 seconds. The moment the words left my mouth, Jordan panicked, raising his hands, his voice trembling. Wait, Gavin, just hear us out. If not selling, then maybe just a loan, just a small one. We need $50,000 to start over. Anthony quickly chimed in, desperate. That's right, Gavin. Just 50 grand. It's nothing to you now. We're family, aren't we? Family helps each other in hard times. I clenched my fists, holding back the anger surging inside me. Right then, an image of Ella flashed through my mind. Her pale face on the hospital bed, her fragile hand gripping mine as she said goodbye. I looked straight at the two men standing before me, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. You want my help? I stepped forward, close enough that they couldn't hide from my gaze. Fine, I said slowly, emphasizing every word. Go to the cemetery. Kneel at my wife's grave. Beg her for forgiveness for everything you did to her. I paused for a beat, then finished, my voice sharp and final. If she forgives you, then I will too. At that, both Anthony and Jordan stood frozen, stunned into silence. Neither could say a word. I calmly closed the door in their faces, hearing the sound of their hurried footsteps retreating down the driveway. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes inside the quiet house. No more anger, no more pain, only the peace that comes when you finally reclaim your self-respect. If you're still here, still listening to my story after all this time, there's one thing I want to say to you. Thank you for staying with me. I know this journey hasn't been easy to hear and even harder to accept, because sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people we once loved the most. When I walked away from my family, from the company I once believed would be my life's work, I carried a lot of guilt with me. There were nights I asked myself, was I wrong? Was I too cruel to turn my back like that? But with time I came to realize, enduring doesn't always mean loving. Sacrificing doesn't always mean noble. Some families, some relationships, they are just hollow shells, rotten on the inside long before we're willing to admit it. And if you keep clinging to them just because of the word family, just because of a sense of duty, in the end, the person you lose will be yourself. So if today you find yourself stuck in a place like that, in a toxic family, a rotting company, a relationship stripped of respect, permit yourself to choose differently. Choose to step into the light. Choose yourself. Choose your dignity. Don't look back. Don't mourn what was never truly worthy of you. And if anyone ever asks me, if you could do it all over again, would you make the same choice? I would answer without hesitation. No, I would still walk away, and I wouldn't look back. And before I end this story, I want to ask you, those of you who are still here, listening until the very last moments, if you were in my shoes, if you stood before a family that was willing to cast you aside the moment you fell, if you were betrayed at your weakest, what would you do? Would you keep enduring it, trying to patch things back together? Or would you choose to walk away, protect yourself, and never look back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. And if this story touched even a small corner of your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share it with others. Your support means more than you know, and it keeps me going, telling honest stories like this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you on the next journey. Imagine this. You're at the dinner table when your dad hurls a plate of spaghetti straight into your face, in front of the entire family. What would you do? I've been there. Tomato sauce splattered across my collar, splashed on my face, soaked into my hair, and dripped onto the table. But the most painful part wasn't the mess. It was the blank stare from my mom and the sound of my little brother giggling as he live-streamed the whole thing, me, completely humiliated. But what truly shocked me wasn't any of that. It was my grandpa's decision when he walked into that chaotic kitchen. Stay with me. Let me tell you what happened next. Hello everyone, I'm Sean Whitaker. I'm 27 years old and currently living in Sacramento, California. I work as a software engineer at a company specializing in automation technology. The job provides a steady income, enough for me to support myself and maintain my life. I live alone in a new apartment, not far from where I used to stay. This place is the result of years of hard work and a decision that wasn't easy to make. But that decision allowed me to leave my family's shadow and start over on my terms. My life these days is pretty simple. Before heading to work every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, put on some soft jazz, and sit at the kitchen table to enjoy it. Not many people drop by. Honestly, I like it that way. But finding that peace didn't come easy. I had to go through a night I'll never forget. It all started with what seemed like an ordinary phone call. But that call turned out to be the beginning of everything. The voice on the other end was familiar. The words were brief. Yet something about it made my chest tighten. I couldn't name it then, but I felt it deep down. After that call, the house I grew up in started to feel different, like it no longer belonged to me. It stopped being a place I could return to. It became just another part of my memory. It was a Saturday afternoon around 3 o'clock. I had just returned from the office when I unexpectedly received a call from my mom, Hannah Whitaker. I paused for a moment when I saw her name on the screen. It had been quite a while since I'd heard anything from her. Seeing her name made my hand freeze, and my mind instantly took me back to that afternoon 3 months ago. The day I quietly packed my things and walked away from the house I had lived in for over 20 years. I remember it clearly. As I stood at the door, my younger brother, Felix, leaned against the fridge with his hands in his pockets, eyes turned away. My dad, Henry, was sitting at the head of the dinner table. In a low and firm voice, he said, "If you want to live in this house, you need to fulfill your responsibilities to this family." My mom had her back to me, standing at the sink washing dishes. She didn't turn around. She just said slowly, "Family stays together. Anyone who leaves is abandoning their blood." Hearing those words from my parents, I felt something tighten in my chest, like I'd taken a step backward in the house I grew up in. The sense of not being accepted settled into me, quiet and explicit, without anyone needing to spell it out. And since the day I left that house 3 months ago, I hadn't gotten a single call from them. I answered the call a few seconds after those memories passed through me. The moment I picked up, my mom spoke right away. Her voice was steady, straight to the point. She said, "Sean, come home for dinner tonight." I didn't respond to her invitation right away. It was too short and vague for me to understand what she meant. There was no explanation, no follow-up. Inside, I didn't feel happy or angry, just confused. My mind went blank for a few seconds, unsure how to process that invitation. Eventually, I figured maybe it was just a regular dinner. If that was the case, I could go without expecting too much. At 5 p.m., before heading to my parents' house, I carefully wrapped up a loaf of garlic bread I just baked, the same one my family always devoured before the main course on special nights. In my head, I imagined that night might turn out warm, even comforting. Maybe I'd get to sit next to each of them again, hear their stories like when I was little. I didn't know that just a few hours later, that very dinner table would make me see my family in a way I never had before, and never would again. It was 6 p.m. when I pulled up in front of the old house. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. This used to be the place I thought I could always return to, filled with the familiar voices of my parents and little brother each night. I used to believe that no matter what happened, I'd be welcomed here. But when my mom opened the door, her eyes were calm, and her nod was polite. That's when I truly understood. The distance between me and my family wasn't about time or space. It was how they looked at me, like I no longer belonged here. When I stepped inside, everyone was already there in the familiar space. Felix was at the head of the table, his phone set up on a tripod as he adjusted the livestream angle. The side light glowed on his face, and the comments remained non-stop. I stood there for a few seconds, watching him, then quietly sat in my old seat. Dinner had been prepared with more care than usual. Meatball pasta, arugula salad, and a bottle of red wine already poured. From the outside, it looked like a special occasion. But inside, I felt uneasy. As the meal began, my parents tried to cut through the silence with some familiar small talk. "How's work going? Is the new apartment treating you well?" I gave short answers. It all felt like the prelude to something else, something bigger. The air at the table wasn't relaxed. It was like everyone was waiting for the right moment to bring up their plans. When the main course was served, my dad, Henry, sat up straight, gently set his utensils down, and looked directly at me. He spoke clearly. "Sean, your mom, and I think it's time you let Felix use your apartment for a while." The second those words left his mouth, my hand froze midair above the table. Something inside me tightened, though I couldn't tell if it was from the sudden request or the way he said it, like it went without saying. After a few seconds, I looked over at my mom. She didn't lift her head. Her hands rested quietly on the table. No one looked at me. No one seemed surprised or even uncertain. When I didn't answer right away, my dad went on. "Felix needs a quiet space to create content. His work's starting to take off." At that point, I wasn't silent anymore. I stayed calm, looked him in the eye, and asked, "Are you serious? That apartment, I saved for it. I bought it with my own money." That's when his tone changed. It wasn't calm anymore. His voice got lower, heavier, and he said, "You lived in this house for 25 years. Now it's time you learned to give back to your family." That wasn't just a request. It landed like a cold reminder. They saw all those years I spent growing up in this house as a debt I hadn't finished paying off. I sat there quietly, and a tight, choking feeling rose in my chest. Those sleepless nights writing code, turning down plans to save on rent, scrambling during short layoffs were proof of how hard I'd worked. And now, all of it was being reduced to a negative balance in their eyes, just because I once sat at this table as a son who still owed his share to them. After what my dad said, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I wasn't that kid who had to give up new toys for his little brother. I wasn't the eldest child, always stepping back to keep the family dinner from falling apart. I had left this place to live on my terms, and if I stayed quiet again, I'd be right back in the cycle I spent years breaking free from. A few seconds later, I looked my dad in the eyes, gathered all the courage I had, and said it straight. "That apartment is something I worked for myself." "I disagree." The air around the table froze after those words left my mouth. Felix stopped mid-motion, eyes wide. My mom flinched a little, instinctively touching her chin, but didn't say anything. My dad stared at me, his voice low but every word sharp and deliberate. "You dare refuse my request?" Still looking straight at him, I answered clearly, "Yes. Stop trying to control me." The second he heard me say no again, my dad shoved his chair back and shot to his feet, his face tense and flushed red, holding a full plate of spaghetti. Before I could react, I saw that plate fly straight at me. The tomato sauce soaked my collar, splashed on my face, seeped into my hair, and dripped down the table. After the plate hit me, he stood there, breathing hard, arms hanging by his sides. He didn't step closer. He didn't say another word. His eyes flicked across the table and landed on my mom, like he was searching for a lifeline in a situation he didn't see coming. When no one reacted, he straightened his posture, chin slightly lifted, trying to look like he still had control. But I could see it in his eyes, a mix of fury and bruised pride. When that plate hit my face, I didn't hear anything else. The first thing I felt wasn't heat or pain. It was cold. A strange kind of cold, not from the sauce on my skin, but from the humiliation sinking into my sense of dignity. That was the first time I had ever seen my dad that furious. And also the first time I saw just how blatant the unfairness in our family could be. There was nothing left to hide. Seconds later, a heat surged up in my chest. It hit me not because I was shocked, but because I had just been cut out of my place as a child in the very home I grew up in. Felix practically jumped up from his seat after that loud motion. He quickly turned his phone toward me, his voice loud with excitement. "See? Told y'all the drama in my family's real." Right then, I turned and looked at him. His eyes didn't flinch. He genuinely enjoyed himself, like he just captured a perfect scene for his audience. What I felt in that moment wasn't rage. It was a sudden wave of disappointment. Not because I was being filmed, but because I realized my younger brother didn't even see this as a line that shouldn't be crossed in a family. To him, the moment I was humiliated was just content for engagement. Faced with Felix's shameless indifference, my anger began rising in clear, heavy waves. I turned without warning and slapped his tripod hard to the ground. The crash echoed, dry and loud. His phone flew off to the side. Felix jerked back, startled. I didn't let him say anything. I pointed straight at his face and said, "You just crossed the line." After everything, my mom sat still, her hand covering her mouth, eyes avoiding mine. She didn't rush over to stop anything or say a single word to cut the tension hanging in the air. By then, my eyes held no specific emotion, just an emptiness growing in my chest, like the rest of me had started quietly detaching from this house, piece by piece. And I knew for sure this wasn't over. Right after I knocked the tripod to the ground, Felix bent down to pick up his phone. He hadn't even brushed the dust off the case when his voice cut through the air. Steady, unfazed. I'm the one supporting this whole house. Borrowing your apartment for a while. What's the big deal? Hearing that, I froze. I couldn't react. I felt a wave of heat rush through my chest and catch in my throat. In that moment, tight, boiling with tension, I turned to look at him. Slowly. In the thick, suffocating air of that kitchen I once considered home. My eyes locked on the younger brother I used to believe would always be an inseparable part of this family. And just a few seconds of looking at him brought back a flood of memories. So sharp and vivid it felt chilling. I remembered when Felix dropped out of college and said he wanted to be a TikToker. My parents didn't object. On the contrary, they bought him all the gear. Cameras, lights, microphones, and even cheered him on. It's good he's learning to make money early. I remembered when a few of his videos went viral and the whole house celebrated like we just won the lottery. My mom told her friends, Felix is more practical than his older brother, who just dreams all day. I remembered it was Felix who took them on their first vacation, and from that moment on, every gaze in the house tilted in one direction. And me? I scraped together month after month to make payments on that apartment. Every time I was brought up moving out, it got brushed aside because, in their eyes, I was still doing the right thing by sending money home like clockwork. All those memories of unfairness, the blatant, ridiculous imbalance, rose in my throat like a knot, tightening with every breath. It was as if everything I'd never dared to say was now sitting there, crushing my chest, daring me to let it out finally. As I stood there, motionless, the thick tomato sauce slowly soaking into my collar, a familiar voice rose from behind me. What's going on here? The sound of that voice made the whole kitchen freeze. Every eye turned toward the back door. Standing there was my grandfather, Daniel Whitaker. At 77, he still held his back straight and his gaze sharp. He had just returned from a trekking trip with his group of retired friends in Oregon. No one in the family had expected him to walk in at that exact moment. His eyes scanned the room, then stopped on me. His grandson, the one he'd always been toughest on, covered in tomato sauce, my collar rumpled, food clinging to my shirt. He didn't say a word, just furrowed his brow slightly. When my father saw him, there was a flicker of unease in his eyes, like he'd just been caught doing something he knew couldn't be explained away. But almost instantly, he pulled himself together and tried to take control, speaking in that familiar, firm voice. You see that? He disrespected me, wouldn't listen, and he nearly broke Felix's livestream setup. Before my grandfather could respond, my mom jumped in, her tone accusatory. He just knocked over Felix's phone. Who knows what else he would have done if I hadn't stepped in. But my grandfather didn't react to any of it. He walked straight to my side. He pulled a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and gently wiped the tomato sauce from my face in a calm silence that almost felt louder than their voices. He said nothing, but I knew that gesture meant he had seen enough. Once he folded the handkerchief back into place, he looked me in the eye and, in his steady, deep voice, asked, Sean, tell me what happened. I didn't hesitate. I answered him directly because for as long as I could remember, he was the only one in the family I truly believed would listen all the way through. He never interrupted, diminished me, or tried to make me live by his rules. To him, respect wasn't about age or hierarchy. It was earned through fairness. Keeping my breath steady, I told him everything, clearly and without exaggeration. I didn't need to push the point. I knew he would understand the rest. When I finished, he stood there for a few seconds. His face didn't change. Then, after a short silence, he turned to face my father. And with a voice calm but heavy like iron, he said, Henry, apologize to him. My dad gave a cold smirk, let out a scoff and replied, You're old, Dad. Just relax and stay out of this. After that disrespectful answer, my grandfather's face didn't flinch, but I could feel the heat of his anger contained behind those eyes now locked sharply onto my father. A few seconds later, he turned toward the whole dinner table. His eyes steady, his voice low but firm enough to shake the room. He declared, This house is still under my name. If none of you see what's wrong here, if no one feels the need to apologize, pack your things and get out. The silence in the kitchen after that was thick and heavy. I glanced at Felix. His head was down, fingers spinning the phone in his hands. He said nothing. My mom stared at the floor, hands clenched tightly in her lap. My dad looked off to the side, eyes avoiding everything. While everyone sat in silence, I could hear my heartbeat, slow and heavy in my chest. And at that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. A new line had been drawn, right in the middle of what used to be called family. Right after that long silence, my father shot up from his seat, his face flushed with anger, and yelled, "You're kicking your son out over him?" Still calm, my grandfather replied, "I gave you the chance to apologize. You didn't take it." He paused for a beat, then turned to look at me. His gaze was slow but firm, like he was weighing a decision bigger than anger. Then, with a voice steady and unwavering, he looked around the room, at each one of them, and said, "You want him to give up his apartment? Fine. The three of you go live there. This house stays with him." The words landed like a final verdict. No appeals, no discussion. I saw it, pure shock taking over my father's face. His lips tightened, his eyes widened, and through clenched teeth he hissed, "You can't do that. This is my house. Mine." My mother also stood up from her chair, panic flashing. Her voice broke as she nearly cried out, "Dad, this is too much. What will people think about our family?" I glanced over at Felix. He didn't say a word. I just looked from Dad to Mom and then toward our grandfather. His eyes looked lost, like he was silently begging for someone to step in, but no longer knew where to turn. I didn't move. I just stood there, and something inside my chest cracked open. It wasn't satisfactory. It wasn't about winning. It was because, for once, my grandfather stood up for me without me having to prove I deserved it. As the reactions played out around him, my grandfather's face hardened. He didn't yell, but I could feel the heat of his anger rising under that quiet restraint. He turned and strolled to the cabinet near the front door. No one dared to speak. No one dared to stop him. The room was so silent, I could hear the soft creak of the hinge as he opened the door. In his hands were 3 jackets. My father's brown one, my mother's navy coat, and Felix's familiar black hoodie. Without a single word, he tossed them out onto the front steps. Slow, deliberate. No explanations. No drama. Just action. The front door stayed open. A breeze drifted in, carrying the cold feeling of something that had just been expelled from this home. When he turned back around, he stood squarely in the middle of the room. His eyes fixed on all 3 of them, and his voice dropped even lower. "I may be old, but I'm still clear-headed, and I know right from wrong." Then he added, with no need to raise his voice, "No one gets to take my grandson's home and expect him to thank you for it." After those words, my father stood frozen. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. My mother kept her head down, fingers locked tightly together, her eyes glued to the floor like she was trying to disappear. The only sound in the room was the soft wind moving through the open door. I stayed where I was, staring at the man who did what I never dreamed of. A wave rose in my chest, not from emotion, but from the quiet, unfamiliar feeling of finally being worth something in this house. And in that moment, I realized the old door in front of us didn't just swing open to force someone out. It also opened something else, something that had never existed in this family. Faced with my grandfather's firm stance, I saw my father falter. His face was still tight with tension, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. He stepped back, fists still clenched, lips parting like he wanted to argue, but the words never formed. Before he could say anything, my grandfather's voice cut in, sharp and final, leaving no room for interruption. Still looking straight at me, he said clearly, "Sean, go back to your apartment, pack a few things, then come back here." I didn't say a word. I just nodded and quietly walked out of that kitchen. The feeling was like stepping out of a courtroom without a judge, without a jury, but with a verdict handed down, grounded in nothing but what was right. On the drive back to my apartment, my head was spinning. Every stretch of road seemed to echo with that plate crashing down. The feeling of sauce on my clothes, Felix's averted gaze, and my parents' voices looping through my thoughts like they were trying to push back into old memories. My chest still felt heavy, even though I knew the one who stood up for me was the most respected voice in this family. And I knew this much. My father only raised his voice when Grandpa wasn't around. Because my grandfather isn't someone easily swayed. He was a soldier who trained thousands of men, stood on real battlefields, and faced death without blinking. In my eyes, and the eyes of everyone in the Whitaker line, his word carries more weight than any ruling from any court. And right now, with the land and the house still in his name, no matter how loud my father got, he had to understand. He was standing on ground that no longer answered to the old rules. But while I was packing up a few things in my small apartment, I had no idea that everything was already being put into motion back at the house. Not with emotion, with law. My grandfather's attorney, Franklin Moore, arrived less than an hour after I left. At Grandpa's request, he brought 2 copies of previous wills and a newly drafted document, and rushed them into completion. In that draft, complete control and ownership of the house would be transferred directly to me, if my father, mother, and Felix didn't vacate within 72 hours. No arguments, no negotiations. Every word of protest was formally documented. They were instructed to pack all personal belongings within the set time frame. Any delay would be treated as a civil violation, as outlined by Franklin in the property terms. Because with my grandfather, once he speaks, everything moves around the axis of the moral code that has governed his life. And when I finally closed the door to my apartment, the silence that followed felt strange, almost too quiet. At that moment, I still didn't know if I had just stepped out of a battle or into the first stage of something much longer. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. Around 11 p.m., I stood in the middle of the living room. The air felt thick, like a layer of dust that had settled on everything. No one spoke. No one moved from their seat. On the familiar table, a set of keys had been placed neatly in front of my father. Per my grandfather's decision, they were the keys to my apartment, the place my family would temporarily move into. In a slow but firm voice, Grandpa made it clear. The apartment must remain untouched. Nothing was to be removed, modified, or altered without his permission. With attorney Franklin Moore present, every condition had been formally documented. My parents and younger brother, who once lived in a 2,500 square foot house in the West Grove Township, now had to accept relocating into an apartment barely over 550 square feet, with 1 bedroom and a small kitchen. I knew that apartment wasn't anything luxurious. The walls hadn't been repainted since the last round of repairs. The range hood in the kitchen worked inconsistently, and the central AC barely cooled more than one area at a time. But it was the product of 4 years of saving, a symbol of my independence. To them, sharing such a cramped space wouldn't be easy, not even close. That night, after my parents and younger brother officially left the Whitaker house, I sat alone in the kitchen. The smell of tomato sauce lingered in the air, a stubborn trace, like a reminder that couldn't be wiped away. I looked over at my grandfather and quietly asked, "You did all this, for what?" With a distant look, like he was reaching back for something long past, he lifted his head and answered slowly, "I just wanted your father to understand the value of fairness." His answer left me silent, not because it shocked me, but because, for the first time, I heard something close to regret in his voice. He told me the gap between him and my father had only grown after spending so many years away from home in military service. His wife, my late grandmother, had been kind but far too indulgent. My dad grew up in a world without many limits. With a calm, almost unsettling steadiness in his eyes, he said, "It wasn't until tonight, after staying silent for too long, that I truly saw what he did to you at dinner was unacceptable." He paused, then added one line, clear and heavy, a sentence I felt settle deep in my chest. "To me, real love and fairness have to go hand in hand. A father who doesn't teach his child where the line is, no matter how much he loves them, is still harming." Hearing him say that, I realized something undeniable. My grandfather had never resented my father. He still carried a deep, enduring love for him. But that love no longer came in gentle pats on the back or warm encouragements like it once had. It had transformed into something firmer, something unshakable. A quiet but resolute kind of correction, shaped by boundaries, discipline, and decisions that force people to stop and truly reflect. It wasn't punishment. It was course correction, late but necessary. After everything he shared with me, I no longer saw him as just the head of the family. He became something else entirely, a final marker between what's right and what's easy. What he had done wasn't about fixing a single chaotic dinner. It was about realigning a path that had veered off too long ago. I don't know what will happen next, but I do know. My family has just entered a phase where no one can pretend not to see anymore. After that day, I officially returned to the old house with Grandpa. No more quiet dinners in a tiny apartment. No more long silences between 4 blank walls. But I also knew this wasn't the end. And the next thing Grandpa asked me to do made me hesitate. A week after they moved in, my apartment was listed for sale, 5% below market value. It wasn't an easy decision, but Grandpa made it clear, This wasn't punishment. It was a clean cut, severing the thread that had kept me tied to a version of the past I'd outgrown. 2 days after the listing went live, a young educated couple came to see the place. They made an offer and signed the papers that same afternoon. Then came what we had both anticipated. My mom looked confused when the buyers arrived at my apartment, carrying legal documents and a formal 30-day move-out notice. Felix tried to keep his composure, but when they realized it was real, my father, Henry, completely lost control. Around 10 a.m., he showed up outside Grandpa's house, banging both fists on the front door, his voice echoing down the street. Face flushed with rage, he shouted through the wooden door, "Sean, you ungrateful little bastard, turning on your own family. You're trying to steal my house and throw me out on the street." But it didn't stop there. He returned to his car, popped the trunk, and pulled out a red gasoline can. His hands trembled, but his eyes were locked, tense and wild. In a frenzy, he yelled, "If you don't leave my house, I'll burn it all down. Don't push me." His shouting rang through the neighborhood. People came out of their homes. Some started filming. Within minutes, video clips were already making their way into the neighborhood group chat. Inside, I stood beside Grandpa. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the door. And in his eyes, I didn't see anger. Not even disappointment. Just a deep weariness. The look of a father who had never once heard his son say, "I'm sorry." A few seconds later, with a low and steady voice, he turned to me, placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "From now on, I'm passing this to you." Being trusted like that made every muscle in my body tighten. Not out of fear, but because I knew I could no longer stand still. I immediately called the police and reported an emergency. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars and 2 fire trucks arrived. They restrained my father, removed the gas can from his hands, and took him away, past dozens of neighbors watching from doorways, some still holding their phones up. But even that wasn't the worst part. We didn't know that, during the entire outburst, Felix had silently propped his phone up against the car and started live streaming. No warning, no attempt to stop it. He just stood behind the screen, filming everything like a director behind a live broadcast. In frame, my father pacing the sidewalk, yelling, swearing, yanking the cap off the gas can, threatening to burn everything down. Felix didn't step in, didn't look away. He adjusted the angle to keep Dad centered, his eyes glued to the screen as if watching the viewer count tick up by the second. That look, cold, focused, not anger, not fear, just a chilling intensity, like he was capturing the perfect viral moment. Within an hour, the replay spread across social media. Some cut clips of my dad raising the gas can. Others overlaid dramatic music as he screamed he'd burn it all if they kicked him out. The comments poured in, some outraged, some mocking, some stunned, but nearly all agreed on one thing: that behavior was inexcusable. And then, something no one expected started to take shape. It wasn't the live stream itself that destroyed my father's reputation. It was that it had been broadcast by his son. With one action, Felix shattered whatever boundaries were left in this family. Not in the name of truth, but for views. I knew then that this wasn't just about one person anymore. This was now the story of a family exposing itself to the world. And there was no taking it back. After the police left, the house went utterly still. I leaned against the doorway, unsure what to say. At the far end of the room, Grandpa sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the computer screen. The live stream video played back on it, the same one Felix had streamed just hours earlier. Dad's voice yelling, the sound of the gas can hitting concrete, his face twisted in rage. I stepped closer, but Grandpa didn't look up. He just shook his head slightly and said in a voice I'll never forget, "He destroyed his son's life, and your father may not have a way back anymore." I didn't answer. I stood there watching the video again for a few more seconds, trying to convince myself that what we just lived through had happened. Before we even had a chance to review the legal documents prepared by Grandpa's attorney, documents covering property control, mandatory relocation, and changes to inheritance, another shift happened, and this time it didn't come from us. Due to the act of threatening to use a flammable substance to endanger others and private property, with a live-streamed video as public evidence, the state of California officially stepped in. Just 2 days later, the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office issued a notice. A criminal investigation had been opened against Henry Whitaker, my father. The complaint didn't come from me, Grandpa, or anyone in the family. It came from the prosecutor's office, on behalf of the people of California. In the paperwork delivered to the House, I read the line, "The people of the state of California versus Henry Whitaker." Just one video, just one reckless act witnessed by hundreds. My father, who had run a small machine shop for over 2 decades, now faced a criminal hearing. The charge, felony criminal threat, with a possible sentence of up to 3 years in prison or extended probation with a permanent restraining order. Grandpa received a full copy of the case file and a formal summons to testify as the legal property owner whose safety and assets were threatened. And I, because I had been present during the incident, was also called to give sworn testimony in court. I didn't feel relief as I folded the subpoena and looked out the window, where the neighbor's porch light still spilled through the leaves and across our fence. I didn't feel anger either. Just one thing sat clearly in my chest. Nothing from here on would ever return to how it was. And my family, we had stepped into a space where there was no longer room for pretending or compromise. About 3 days after the court summons arrived, my mother came to Grandpa's house. She didn't call ahead. She just knocked gently, then waited. When I opened the door, she didn't say anything to me. She entered the living room, where Grandpa reviewed documents with his attorney, Franklin. She stood there silently for a few seconds, then bowed her head, voice breaking, "Please, save my husband. I'm sorry, Dad." Grandpa didn't flinch. He didn't respond right away. He closed the file before him, removed his glasses, and looked her straight. His voice was calm and deliberate, each word landing like a pin driven into still air. "I'm not the one who put him in this position. If you want to plead, then plead with your husband, the man who stood in the yard holding a gas can, threatening to burn his own father's home. Plead with your other son who turned our family into bait for views. And finally, if there's still a shred of conscience left in you, go plead with the son you used as a punchline for 27 years. After that, she broke down. Not loud, just small, stuttering sobs like someone realizing something they could never undo. She didn't answer, didn't beg again. She only bowed, turned away, and walked out of the house like someone who no longer had a place to stay. And from that moment on, I knew my family was no longer whole in every sense of the word. At the criminal hearing 1 month later, my father was sentenced to 12 months of supervised probation, along with a no-contact order. He was prohibited from coming within 300 feet of either me or Grandpa. Effective immediately. There was no jail time, but the court was clear. If he reoffended in any way within the next 2 years, the sentence would be upgraded to incarceration. As for Felix, though he faced no criminal charges, his live stream quickly became a lightning rod for public backlash. TikTok officially terminated his account 3 days after the hearing, citing a breach of digital broadcasting ethics. 2 other platforms followed, cutting ties, pulling every ad deal tied to his name. The court never ruled on that. But society has its way of delivering verdicts. Felix lost everything he had built. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time, he understood something I had lived with for years. Being in front of a camera isn't power. Sometimes, it's the fastest way to strip yourself bare. I didn't smile when I heard the news. I didn't feel relief. I just closed my phone, sat beside Grandpa, and poured him a cup of tea. Like every morning. The house was quiet. No leftover noise. Just enough space for 2 people, a steady breath, and something strange. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like I could finally exist, without having to shrink myself just to be allowed to. And to me, that was enough. And today, exactly 1 year after I walked away from that dinner table in a shirt soaked with tomato sauce, I officially signed the papers for a new apartment. It's not much bigger, but it's brighter, more comfortable, and still close to where I used to live. My father now stays in a small house on the outskirts of town. He keeps to himself, avoids the neighbors, and hasn't appeared on any platform since. He's halfway through his probation and attends court-mandated behavioral counseling sessions regularly. My mother lives with him in that quiet space. She doesn't speak up, and she hasn't reached out. But I believe, after everything, she's finally started reflecting on the choice she once agreed to, and the price the entire family paid for just a few seconds of silence. As for Felix, he disappeared from social media after losing every income stream. His old videos were deleted, and brands stopped mentioning his name. I don't know how he makes a living now, and honestly, I don't care like I used to. Only Grandpa remains in the old house. I visit him once a week. We drink tea, tend the garden, replace light bulbs, repaint the fence. He speaks less than he used to, but I know he's still watching over everything. Not with words, but in how he keeps the house neat, and how he always sets out 3 cups on the table. One for him, one for me, and one left empty, as if he's still waiting for someone, even if he's no longer sure they'll ever return. And if there's one thing I want to leave you with after all of this, it's this. Not everyone in your family will stand by you, but that doesn't mean you have to keep enduring it. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't keeping the peace. It's choosing to protect yourself. Even if it costs you your sense of belonging, it's still worth it. Because living true to yourself will always be lighter than living to keep others comfortable. That's the end of my story. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me through every step of this journey, do you think my grandfather was too harsh on my parents and brother? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your perspective in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you in any way, if it stirred something inside you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join me again in the stories still to come. Thank you truly for being here.